This is the first of 4 videos on Native Americans about the time of Columbus's arrival, late 15th century. In this first video, we're going to look at a little background, how Native Americans arrived in the Western Hemisphere. Most scientists believe that people, Homo sapiens, didn't evolve in the Western Hemisphere, but came here via a land bridge known as Beringa. And during the last ice age, 20-30,000 years ago, everything was freezing and the water level dropped, and that exposed some elevated land between Siberia and Alaska. And so people were crossing over this land bridge, but for 10-15,000 years or so, they couldn't proceed into the rest of North America because the glaciers were there. Now, Beringa was too much, it wasn't enough rainfall to have glaciers there, so it was a grassland steppe. But if you went over Alaska, what is Alaska now, and you went down into North America, you couldn't get into the rest of America because it was blocked by glaciers. Well, about 16,500 years ago, the Ice Age was beginning to melt, and you begin to see two routes. Anthropologists believe that people followed to get through the glaciers and into the rest of North America. There's some debate about whether the seagoing people along the eastern coast of Asia and Siberia came prior to that, but there's no real consensus on that. You wouldn't recognize North America that saw the first people arriving from Siberia. As the first Siberians crossed into through the glaciers of the retreating glaciers along those two corridors, they ran across mammals that weren't afraid of them. They'd never seen people, and so they didn't run. And you know, the people were there had a pretty easy time of it initially, but it led to diminished populations of these animals and the extinction of many of the animals. As the years passed, Native Americans moved southward, and their hunting and animal domestication, as well as their planning, tremendously altered the ecosystems they encountered. So again, you wouldn't really recognize the America that greeted the first people crossing over Beringa. As I alluded to earlier, there is some speculation that seagoing peoples may have populated the west coast of the Western Hemisphere prior to this. We know that the Polynesians were very adept at traveling over the waters and had populated a lot of the islands in the Western Pacific. And if you look at the currents and the winds of the South Pacific area, it made it possible, hypothetically, for people to reach South America that way. In 1947, a Norwegian adventurer, Thor Heyerdahl, decided he was going to test this theory, and so he made a boat using the implements that these Polynesians might have had at the time, and nothing mechanical or anything they wouldn't have had, and he followed the currents with the sailing as best he could, and he called this the Kon-Tiki expedition, and it reached the west coast of South America. And so theoretically, it was possible that some people may have reached the Western Hemisphere prior to that, or not through the retreating glaciers. But again, that's not conclusive. By about 10,000 years ago, the migrating people had reached all the way through the tip of South America. So they flowed southward in that 5,000 or 6,000 years since their arrival. And there they developed cultures and societies that varied tremendously, because obviously the environment in which they settled varied tremendously. People adapt to the environment in which they live. Some cultures were advanced, while others still were not. Still, by the time of the European arrival in the late 15th century, not one Indian society invented the wheel. Some Indians were ruled by females, others banned women from almost all important activities. Some lived peacefully, and others saw warfare as a way of life. The Pima Indians of Arizona actually subjected warriors to a 16-day cure for insanity after each battle. Some saw premarital sex as appropriate, others punished it harshly. The Natchez Indians of the southwestern part of what's now the United States used to encourage their youth to have sex, at least until marriage. After marriage, the punishment for an affair was losing your hair or even an ear. At the time of European arrival, population estimates ranged from anywhere to 10 to 100 million Native Americans, and most of them were in South America because warmer climate, about 50% or so. In Central America, 40%, and in North America, they were only about 10%. I'm not going to talk about the South American Indians who were the most advanced because that's not part of the United States today, and but you're probably aware of the Aztecs and Incas and so forth. But in this class, we're going to focus on the North American Indians. In North America, of course, North America's environment's tremendously varied. And so even within North America, the Native American cultures were diverse. There were about 300 or so languages in North America alone, and most had at least 20,000 words. When the Europeans arrived, they couldn't understand the Native American languages, so to the Europeans, they all seemed to be speaking the same thing. But in fact, the Native Americans had a wide, diverse culture and languages here. Here you can see some of the Native American languages and cultures, again, all determined by the environment. In any event, this concludes the first introductory video on Native Americans, this one focusing on how they arrived here.